Capitola Black Recordings presents an unabridged recording of The Lost Jewel by Charlotte Marie Tucker, or A Lady of England. Chapter 23. The Return. Sir John Allison rose on the following morning in a heavy and irritable mood. Sleep had long forsaken his pillow, and only came at last to frighten him with dreams of horror. He woke with that weight on his spirit which not unfrequently precedes the returning consciousness of its cause. Sir John soon remembered that he had quarrelled with his nephew, that he had driven from his home the only child of the sister whose image had been haunting him during the night. The baronet did not suffer remorse. His deadened conscience could hardly have been roused to such a feeling, but he was uneasy, discontented with himself, everything, and everybody who approached him. The situation of Glidden during the breakfast was one in which his worst enemy might have pitied him. His schemes had so far been successful, but the last step, the most important step, had yet to be taken, and insuperable difficulties appeared to attend it. If that unwieldy, apoplectic-looking man, whose swollen fingers could scarcely guide a pen, should die without making a will or altering one already made, his estate must inevitably descend to his nephew. The carriage which was to convey Glidden to London was ordered to be at the door by 10. Was it to take him to the baronet's lawyer to make necessary arrangements for disinheriting Somers? Or was it, terrible alternative, to hurry the disappointed schemer for ever from the scene of his schemes? Glidden had delayed his departure to the last possible day. If he waited for another, his passage money must be forfeited, and probably his Indian appointment lost. Glidden was like one who, having by indefatigable efforts almost attained to the summit of a mountain, suddenly finds a chasm of unknown depth stretching across his path. He dare not venture on the leap, and yet without it, all his past labour is lost, and he must descend, disappointed and humbled, to the shades of the valley below. Glidden was naturally impatient to enter upon business. Sir John started back from it like a restive horse. Glidden would fain have irritated the baronet's mind yet more strongly against his nephew. Sir John's feelings were undergoing a revulsion, and his irritation was diverting upon his nephew's rival. Glidden had never more anxiously wished to please, and had never found it more difficult to please. He had to conceal his restlessness, control his impatience, converse on indifferent subjects, while his whole soul was wound up to a pitch of anxiety, almost amounting to torture, as minute after minute rolled on, and in spite of all his efforts, he found himself as far from his point as ever. Glidden glanced at his watch. 10:15. Now or never, thought the schemer. Prefacing the remark with a little cough, he commenced, "Partings are always unpleasant." The only reply was a philosophic "Humph!" as the baronet helped himself to a buttered muffin. "When," continued Glidden, "the tie of relationship is strengthened by that of cordial friendship, when one feels the respect, the esteem—" "May I trouble you for a slice of ham?" said Sir John, unceremoniously cutting short a studied peroration. Glidden obeyed with apparent alacrity, though with feelings curiously in contrast to his professions of respect and esteem. It was well, perhaps, for the old baronet that he had not the power to read them. 10 minutes to 10. "I confess, dear sir," said Glidden with a look of concern, "that I do not feel easy on leaving you at present. The state of your valuable health—" "Health, sir, very good health. Nothing the matter with my health. Never was better in my life," growled the baronet, who could seldom bear allusion to his declining years. The observation had evidently been an unfortunate one, and the speaker for some seconds was silenced. "I wish that it were in my power to pitch my tent in old England," presently recommenced the almost desperate Glidden. "I sometimes venture to think it possible that I might be of some service to my friends, but a poor dog like me, tied down to the drudgery of a profession, has scarcely a choice in the matter. If, indeed, I could get anything certain in this country—" "There's nothing certain," observed the baronet, following the train of his own thoughts rather than that of the ideas suggested by Glidden. "I was certain yesterday that Maurice would have become a parson to please me." "It is fortunate," said his companion, "that circumstances have made you at last acquainted with the character of that young man." "Acquainted with it!" exclaimed the testy baronet. "Why, I know it as well as my own." "Your patience, sir, has been long enduring." "There was no need of patience," interrupted Sir John in the true spirit of contradiction. "Maurice was brought up like a Methodist, and has some crotchets of his own, but he is a fine fellow in the main, did well at school, excellently well. He's a lad anyone might be proud of." "And yet with such wilful disobedience." "Why, my father wished Gilbert to take orders, poor Gilbert who was lost in the Speedwell, that he might hold this very same living. I remember all about it now, as if it had happened yesterday. Gilbert was much such a youth as Maurice, a fine handsome fellow was Gilbert. My father was sitting in this very room, when Gilbert, looking pale—" The baronet started almost from his seat, as though his words had actually raised before him the apparition of the brother who had long been dead. The door had been unclosed before he could finish his sentence, and Maurice stood before him, but so much changed in appearance that it needed no touch of superstition to account for the baronet's start. The brow of the youth was encircled by a bandage of linen. His face, even his lips, were bloodless as those of a corpse. His left hand was supported by a sling, and yet there was a brightness and satisfaction in his eye, which announced the bearer of good tidings. "Maurice, my boy, what has happened?" exclaimed Sir John in alarm. "That which has induced me to appear here, as I should not otherwise have done, without a communication from yourself. But I could not let any hand but my own restore this to its rightful owner." And with something of exultation in his look, the young man placed before his uncle the long-lost jewel, the beautiful Atma. Sir John almost trembled at the sight. The recollections connecting with the gem, recollections of a dead brother, and a daughter in her grave, and the extraordinary and sudden manner in which he had again received that which he had believed to be lost to him forever, might have overcome a man of quicker feelings and more impressionable nature. As it was, the voice of the baronet betrayed more emotion than Maurice had believed him capable of showing as, grasping his nephew's hand in both his own, he exclaimed, "My dear boy, you have done me a service which I can never forget." "Mr. Glidden's carriage is—" commenced the butler as he entered the room, but the man stopped abruptly in the midst of the announcement, fixing his eyes with a scared and wondering expression on the ghastly countenance of Maurice Somers. He had, however, said enough to convey his meaning, and Glidden had seen enough to make him aware that Grandmont Hall was no longer a place for him. Pallid with excitement, half choked with disappointment and suppressed rage, Glidden bade a hasty farewell to the baronet, whose mind was so much preoccupied with his nephew and his jewel, that he was well pleased to have the courtesies usual on such occasions cut as short as possible. Glidden rushed into the carriage, without bestowing a glance on the expectant servants who officiously crowded around, buried himself in a corner, with his hat drawn over his eyes, and never raised them until he had left far behind him a place which he had once hoped to have called his own, but which he could now only wish to forget. Meanwhile, Maurice, in a few words, often interrupted by eager questions, had related his uncle the strange events of the night. After a desperate struggle with his assailant, which had lasted for several minutes, the young man had succeeded in wrenching the knife from Jondrille, but not before he himself had received several severe gashes. Finding himself disarmed of his dangerous weapon, the ruffian had fled, and Maurice, faint from loss of blood, but holding the jewel in his bleeding hand, had made his way to the vicarage, where he had received every kindly attention from Edward Manton and his family. How the Atma had lain buried at the foot of the sapling in the spot where it had been so strangely discovered remained a mystery to the wondering baronet, till the police, who had been set on the highwayman's track, had lodged Jem Jondrel in a jail. This man affirmed on his trial that he had accidentally found the jewel in a heap of rubbish, that he was carrying it back to its owner, when, in a quarrel with a companion on the way, he had flung it over the thicket, where it had remained until discovered by Maurice. The baronet listened with deep interest to the story told by his nephew. "What a strange fate," he exclaimed, "has attended this precious jewel! Won in fight, carried in safety through perils of flood and fire, strangely lost, more strangely recovered, buried, and yet raised from the dust, struggled for, bled for, even died for. There it is, bright and uninjured still, as beautiful, as perfect, as precious as it was when first it shone in a prince's crown. Maurice, my boy, the gem is yours. You have fairly won it, and will doubtless know how to keep it. My course is nearly run. What are gems to a childless old man? Take it as an earnest of the inheritance which must one day be yours, and remember that whatever riches you may enjoy upon earth, that one jewel outweighs them all." And here we take leave of the characters of our tale. Yet one word, dear reader, before the leaves are closed, and the volume laid aside, which may have beguiled some hour of leisure. I know not if you be young or old, rich or poor, if you be nursed in the lap of luxury, or earn your bread by the sweat of your brow, if your face wear the bloom of youth, or be furrowed by the wrinkles of age. I know not if your heart beat high with hope, or if my fiction have been perused only to lull the sense of pain or sorrow. But one thing I know, you are at this moment the possessor of an Atma, a soul, a jewel beyond all price, which it is the unceasing design of the power of evil to win from you by subtlety and deceit. Who can tell the vicissitudes through which that precious Atma may already have passed? Review the history of your soul. Has it not been surrounded by the flames of temptation, hazarded in the pursuit of pleasure, buried beneath the rippling waters of frivolity, or deep sunk in the mire of selfish indulgence? Have you not possessed it without knowing its value? Have you not encompassed it with the tinsel of vanity, till the world could no longer recognize it as a thing immortal and destined for heaven? Have you thought on all that it cost? Have you remembered that, for a price was given, nor man nor angel could have paid, nor all the host of heaven? Have you considered its origin, and its glorious destiny in the world to come? Oh, answer not these questions lightly, for their subject is most weighty and solemn. The time is approaching, and may now be near, when, amidst the ashes of an earth destroyed, the gems of God, and those gems alone, differing indeed in beauty, brightness, and splendor, yet each precious and fair in his sight, shall shine in the glory of an eternal day, the chosen treasures of the heavenly King. The Lord will gather up his jewels, one from earth and yet not earthly. Sharpest griefs and trials here will but have been given to each, a polished brightness, that celestial light, reflecting from 1,000 points, the gems may sparkle with a radiance worthy heaven. The Lord will gather up his jewels. Oh, may we be numbered with those gems of light. Blessed Saviour, thou hast bought us with thy blood. Shed on us now thy glory, make us thine. Change our vile natures by thy Spirit's power, and make us to be numbered with thy saints in glory everlasting. Yea, Amen. Glimpses of the Unseen. Thank you for listening to Capitola Black Recordings. I hope you have enjoyed this recording of The Lost Jewel by Charlotte Marie Tucker.